Hi everyone, welcome to Google Developers Live, and my name's Ali, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Google Drive SDK, and specifically a new feature we launched last week called the App Data Folder. So how are we going to look at this? Well, I've written a small chunk of code, and we're just going to walk through it so you can see the basic operations, how easy it is. First, I'd like to talk about why should you care? Why should you as an Android developer care about storing your data in the Google Drive App Data Folder? Well, this is a bit about the App Data Folder. It is a folder that lives on your Google Drive that is specific for your application. Okay, so you can store data in there. The user can't actually read or modify that data. What they can do is they delete that data. And it's in their drive, it takes up their storage quota, so there are no limits on the data size apart from the amount of quota that the user has available. Obviously, if you're using up all the user's drive, then they're more likely to delete it. So it's a folder specific for your application. No one else can modify the files, no one else can read the files, only the user can delete them if they're taking up too much quota. Okay? Why should you use this from Android? Well, why should it matter? Well, I personally think people are getting to the stage where they've got multiple devices on multiple platforms. Now, one of the beauties about Drive and the Drive API is that you can access it and use it from any platform, really. And part of that is mobile. But say if you have an application that also has a desktop component or a web component, or someone might have a tablet, an Android tablet or an iOS phone, you want to be able to have some way of keeping data synchronized across all these platforms. Now, Drive is that, essentially. It's the best way. People have Google accounts. Many people have Google accounts, and they come with 5 gigabytes of storage. So you don't really need to think about, does the user have an account? Do they have enough quota? You can just go ahead and use it. Now, on mobile, that's particularly useful for any state you want to share between instances of the application. So that might be configuration data. It might be application state, for example, which window is open, which tabs they had open, if it's a browsing kind of application. You might want to log history, for example, so you have a history of commands a user did with an application, or maybe even an undo history. You could make that across all different platforms. And of course, for situations like saving games, that's another potentially huge case here. You don't want the user to be able to modify the saved game file. You want to be able to store as many as you like, and they can delete them as and when they wish. Okay, so that's some of the use cases I think is particularly powerful on mobile platforms, because people do have more than one mobile device. So that's app data. How can we use it? Well, fortunately, it's really, really easy. Now, I've written a tiny little application. The first thing we're going to do is just run through the application, just run it, and then we'll talk about how it works. So if you can see the Android tablet now, it's very simple. I've got a background and I've got a single button. Okay, so I'm going to click the button and we get a little pop-up saying we've created a file. It says found and it says updated. Okay, so we've done 3 operations, and hopefully those are the basic operations you need to get started. So let's have a look at some of the code. I first started by taking the Android quickstart guide. Sorry to jump around. It's here, developers.google.com/drive/quickstart-android. Now, that is the best way to get yourself up and running with the Google Drive API on Android. It has a number of steps. If you go through them all, it will work. Okay, some of them are a bit complicated. It took me a while to get them all set up. It includes, for example, plugins. You need Eclipse, the Google plugin for Eclipse. But if you go through all these, you will get up and running as soon as you possibly can. So I took that application. That is a camera application. It takes a photo and it uploads that photo to Google Drive. So what I've done is I've removed all the camera stuff. I didn't really want to store photos, so I've removed the opening of the camera. All the other uploading of the photo I've removed, because I want to store custom files in my app data folder. So what I did do is I've added the button you saw, and on clicking of the button, it will run this run method. Okay, now the run method essentially starts a new thread, calls main, and catches all the exceptions. Now I've done that just so I can write code freely without having to worry about exceptions. If you're in a production environment, you may decide to do things differently or the same or however. But this is just to make our code look simple. So we have this run method that starts the thread, executes main, and in main I've got our code. So let's go to the top. So I've explained to you what app data is, why should you care, hopefully, the prerequisites you need to install this, they're all on the quick start page, and we've run the application. So the first thing we need to decide is, what are we going to call our file? Okay, now I've just got a string there, the title, and I'm going to call it configuration file. Okay, and then I've got a file. This is a Drive file resource from the Drive API. I'm going to call it config, and it's going to be the latest file we have as we're going through this procedure. Okay, so what's the first thing we want to do? We want to upload some content to the app data folder. Okay, the first thing you'll need is some actual content. This can be anything. We have different adapters for uploading files, for example. In my case, I've got a byte array content. Now that just takes a byte array in memory and it uploads it. So as I say, it could be a file. You could load the file from disk. One thing you do need to do is always pass a MIME type. We're using text plain here. Now, this is the MIME type that the file gets stored as. You have to have it there, and it's actually part of this. So always remember, you have to add the MIME type. So we've got some content. That's what we're going to upload. Now, files in Drive, there's some metadata associated with them, you know, title, whether they're starred, permissions, owners, that kind of thing, in addition to some binary content. So this is the binary content part. Now, in the metadata, when we insert this file, we have to make sure two things. One, it has the right title, okay, which you'll see down below. And two, we set the parent to be the app data folder. Okay, that's absolutely key. If we don't set the parent to the app data folder, then it just won't go there. So how do we do that? Well, it needs a list of parents, okay, a list of parent reference. Now, parent reference is just really a container which has an ID. So I create that list, I create a new list, and I add the parent reference. Now, you'll notice here that I'm calling new parent reference.setID. How can I do that? Well, this has this awesome kind of builder pattern so that most of the setter methods that I can call on this parent reference instance actually return the instance itself. So I can chain these together to make it much more comfortable and much more readable, and just for me to write less code, which is always good. So I add that, and then I create a new file, which is the drive.file resource, and I set my attributes that I want. So as I say, again, using this kind of builder pattern, you set title to the title, and I set parents to the parents. Okay, this file resource is generated from the discovery document, so it already has all the methods you're going to need, and it's always up to date, which is great. So I do that, and finally, I need to insert that into Drive itself. So this calls the API method files.insert. Service is my instance of the Drive service that's been authorized, and I insert it with the first argument is the file itself, the metadata, and the second argument is the binary content that I created earlier. And then I have to remember to call execute. This actually returns another file, so I'm resetting it to be the same variable. So that's the first part of it. Oh, and after that, I give the ID of the file I've just created, and I send a message. ShowToast, if we can nip down here. ShowToast is just a method to show a notification to the user, and you saw them popping up. It just makes sure it runs from the right place in the right thread, so I don't have to keep writing that code out. So if I were to run that again, up until where we were, there, I'll run that again. Okay, hopefully we should get a prompt for the account chooser. This is all part of the quick start. When you get an account chooser, you can either ask the user every time. That's perhaps not the best user interface. It might be better to store this in configuration, however you want. But always, please, please, please give the user the chance to choose which account they want to use, because otherwise they will go crazy. So we do that. It will do nothing now apart wait for me to click the button, and if you just see the first pop-up that comes, there we go, created. So that's actually, and it will go off and do the rest of the script. So that's actually created a file in our app data folder. Now let's have a look at what that looks like. Inside Google Drive itself, hidden behind the gear, we have Manage Apps. Now Manage Apps is a dialog that allows you to configure what has access to your drive. Every application, whether it's an Android app, whether it's a web app, whatever has a drive token, you've authorized for a drive token, will appear here. And your users can use this dialog to revoke access or do whatever they want to your application. In this case, you'll see here that we have now hidden app data, 1 kilobyte. So I've created this app data file, and it's now present there. And as I say, I can't see it as the user, but what I can do is go into options and I can delete the hidden app data. Okay, so I've deleted it now, and the config file's been deleted. So if I rerun my script, it will recreate it. Okay, that's the first part, and probably the most important. How do you create an app data file? So 2 components, the metadata, the file itself, upload them to the correct folder, which is app data. Now, app data, we use it as a string, as an ID. It's actually an alias. This is a real folder with a regular ID. So what you can do is you can call a get on the app data folder, and you can actually find out what its ID is. This will make things quicker. Obviously, we have to do the lookup on the back end for app data. If you store that ID, then we wouldn't need to do that lookup. So it's just quicker there. Again, if you have a place to store it, it's useful to store that. Right, so that's the first thing we've done, created that. Next thing I want to show you is how do you get files out of your app data folder? Well, you can call get if you know the ID. In more situations than that, you probably don't know the ID. You might want to find it. Now, how would you find it there? Well, I'm going to use two criteria to find it. The first one is a file has to be in the app data folder. We can use that. And the second one is we're going to make sure it's called the same thing as what we called it up here, configuration file. Okay, so the method of the API I'm going to use is drive.files.list. Okay, first thing I do is create a request. I'm not executing the request immediately because I need to modify the request to add my query parameters so I can look it up. Okay, now the query parameters I'm going to set is this query here. We'll just talk about that. App data in parents. So this is saying this file must have a parent that is called app data. Again, you could substitute the real ID of the app data folder if you have that in there. And, which joins this, the title equals our title. So I'm looking for a file in app data which has the right title. And of course, this is a list, so it might return more than one. It might return a few if you've got them. But this is your folder. You know what's in there. You should, if you have 2 in there, it's because you've created 2. You should probably know there. But this sample doesn't take care of that. Once we've set the queue parameter, we can execute our modified request and call get items on the result. Now, get items, again, this isn't checking for errors properly. Get items is a list of drive.file type. So exactly the thing that we put in the first place, we get a list of them back. This might be empty if we don't have it, if we haven't previously created anything. In that case, what we do below is we check that the size of the array, the size of the list is greater than 0, and if it is, we just blindly take the first one. Again, as I say, that could go totally wrong if you've got more than one, but it's your stuff, so you really should know. And then we're going to put a message found if we found it, and not found if we didn't find it. It's going to be found because obviously we just created it in the section above. So if I'm to run this again, this time, sorry, you're getting pretty bored at looking at this demo, but I just want to highlight where it's got to. Okay. So created, and then it should say found, and there we go, it says found. So we've listed your app data folder and taken, using a query of the file name that we want, which is stored in the title parameter. So that's how do you find the file you've made in your configuration? So we've created it and we've fetched it back and using a query. Okay, great. The third and final thing I want to show here is how to update the data. So that's really useful. Configuration changes in one place, you want to update it, so you put some new configuration values. This time I'm actually going to put some JSON in there. I've hard-coded a bit of JSON into a string. For those of you who are wise and watching closely, you'll see that my MIME type is still text plain, which is wrong. The MIME type for JSON should be application/JSON, but that's okay. For the purposes of this demo, doesn't matter. It's likely that you won't change the MIME type, you'll just change the content. So we create another byte array content using this string. Obviously, you would have a data structure, you might have a config object that serializes itself to JSON, XML, whatever, YAML, a million different things you could use. And remember, this is not just for Android. It would have to be a format that you could parse easily on your iOS app or your web app or whatever. So using a generic one like JSON is pretty good here. So we create a new one, and again, this time, we call the method files.update, drive.files.update. Now that takes 3 parameters this time. The first one is the ID that you want to update, which of course is the same ID of the file we've had, config.getID. Then the file metadata. Now this hasn't changed, so I'm just going to pass the thing I got back in there, and that's going to be fine. And again, the new content. And then I'm going to show the message updated. So if we just run this for the last time, okay. So we get the first message, we've created it, not found, oh, not found. Okay. So this time it failed to find it. Shall we give it a proper go so that we make sure it does actually work? Let's turn that off. Found. So if you were watching last time, you'll know that I ended with a 404 not found, so I really just couldn't do that again this time. That would have been too unfair on you guys. So what have we done? We've created a file that you can use on any platform, hidden from the user, that contains configuration data in any format you want. It can be any binary format, any proprietary format you have. You can use that for config, application state, save games, history. The list is endless. Any data you want to be available everywhere. So we've created that. We've then fetched it back from Drive, and I've shown you how to update it. You'll see that's just a tiny amount of code. I've got 60, 70 lines, including the comments. Now, any Java program will tell you that that's a tiny amount of code. So it's easy to do. I believe you should do it. No application I know would be worse off by knowing about different instances running and being able to do something about that for the user. It may be nothing, but just knowing about it and having that option available, I think will improve all your applications, mobile and otherwise. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, please make sure you ask on Stack Overflow or join us on the community. And apart from that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for watching. Good luck with building these Android applications and other platform mobile applications. Tell us about them. We're always keen to hear. Thanks very much. Take care.